Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Meta Matters podcast, the only podcast in esports focusing on performance and coaching. This is the first episode, as I just said, so if you've got any feedback, leave them in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or send us hate mail, I'm sure we'd love to receive it. My
All
name
is
is
welcome.
Tyler Bond, I'm the founder of Acolyte. Acolyte is an esports org in the UK, focusing on coach development. And beside me on my right here is the wonderful Matthew Watson, not just a co-host, but also a co-founder of this little project. Matt, do you want to give an introduction to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Matt. I'm part of IFEC, the International Federation of Esports Coaches. I guess my role is pretty much coach developer and researcher over there. So that's about me.
Cool, fantastic. And we have been trying to get this done for so long now, literally so long. So I'm so glad we finally sat down and found the time to actually turn this into a proper series. So that's probably a really good segue into talking about what exactly the podcast is going to cover. Obviously, it's going to cover my comically large thumb at the minute. I got in a fight with a kitchen knife this week, so hopefully that'll be better pretty soon. But we are going to be talking about all things coaching, including, hopefully, Matt, you can give some psychological tips for everyone watching that they can go away and use today to hopefully improve their game. And if they don't work, then they can shout at you. That's probably a great way to do it. We'll also be interviewing and talking to various top tier coaches from around the world, from the top esports orgs in the world, as well as various other people involved in the esports industry in the UK. Have I pretty much covered everything there, Matt, or did you want anything else?
Yeah, pretty much. I think maybe just the overall aim of this podcast series, apart from for you and I to have a great time, it's to really to delve into sort of coaching and performance in esports, what coaches do, what are the various roles within esports at the moment, where esports is going, how it might be able to improve, and then putting things across, maybe psychological things, maybe more broader performance related topics, putting them across in a way that are sort of understandable, graspable, interesting to people out there, taking the lid off these topics, really.
Absolutely. And that's such an important thing as well. Coaching tends to be such an overlooked role in esports in general, right? It's only really been the past few years that it's even been welcomed as this sort of profession, right? And it's so important that this role is highlighted and talked about by people like yourself who have first-hand experience coaching some of the most interesting and up-and-coming teams in the UK and Europe, right?
Well, yeah.
Don't undersell it now. Come on.
I've been lucky enough to spend the last year and a half sort of involved with esports and esports coaching. Shout out to LDN esports, who I've been sort of affiliated with over the last year, just giving them a little bit of help with sort of performance coaching and psychological sort of aspects of performance. But I'm also sort of in touch with other professionals working in the industry, and I think I have an impression of how sort of the role of the coach is now fairly prominent, and there are some high profile coaches out there, and they're doing some great things, but there's also a lot of ambiguity about the role, what it entails, and whether it is just the same as in traditional sports, or is there something special or different about esports coaching, and maybe also, do we have the opportunity to sort of steer it in a way that is specific to esports? Is there a unique quality about coaching in esports that we haven't thought of yet? So
interesting. So that is coming up in one of the topics we're talking about a little bit later. We've got some fantastic topics today. One of them being Worlds 2020, the finals this weekend. It's going to be really exciting. But probably let's maybe talk about a foundation to start with, right? Let's talk about coaching. You've obviously got a ton of experience coaching, right? So, why don't you tell the people at home what sort of coaches exist in esports right now? Is it just one term, one role? Is it split? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, very true. Or rather, good question. It does seem to be there are a lot of aspects to coaching in esports, and I think that at the moment we are seeing that sort of at least high profile organizations and sort of semi-professional or competitive but lower level teams are emulating traditional sports models, in that they have a head coach, and then they might surround them with some support staff if they can. So that could be a physio, a nutritionist, sports psychologist, and so we're seeing these organizations sort of emulate these structures, and the head coach I think the general perspective is the head coach sits on top of this and leads the team and the players in some sense. But I think we're also we're lacking some research to back all this up. We don't know yet what the most optimal structures are for esports, and it could be that we need a leader that holds most of the decision-making power. But alternatively, there are other systems that could work. We could see, for example, coaches that are sort of more moderators, and we see the players as the experts, and they are certainly the experts in their role, but can we facilitate discussion so that they are able to sort of coordinate all 5 members of their team? We could also see sort of more specific coaches come on board. So, for example, I had a chat with an academic in the UK the other day, and he mentioned the idea of having a communication coach, because communication in esports seems to be one of the most critical topics, and it's usually the first thing to blame when things go wrong. And then otherwise, we also have these additional sort of support staff roles. So we have performance coaches, sports psychologists, trainee sports psychologists, and they all bring something to the table. And I think at the moment we're not quite sure what the potential of it all is and how it can all sort of be configured to really get the best out of the players and turn into sort of really high performance. So success over time that equates to sort of more winning than losing, but also the people within that team group are improving in their roles as well. So it's not just the winning and losing. So
absolutely, and that's actually a really interesting point that you just brought up there regarding communication, right? You know, esports is such a young industry and it's involving so many young people that I think, you know, how many pros have we seen careers ruined by, you know, something they put out on Twitter maybe 10 years ago and it gets dug back up, right? As far as I'm concerned, it's something that we've been pushing inside Acolyte for years now, is this education around communication, and that has to be the full spectrum. In game is so important for actually those wins and losses, but also outside of this, how do you communicate with your team effectively? How do you communicate with your followers, your brand on Twitter or Instagram, wherever, in order to future-proof yourself and protect yourself? You know, because in this culture we're in now, where people have had careers ruined by something that they've dug up from 10 years back, right? And whether that's right or wrong is a different podcast topic, I would say. But it's a very valid concern, and especially for, you know, a young industry like esports. We had a huge Me Too movement and stuff earlier on this year, right? And and you know, being able to communicate yourself in a really effective way is an incredibly important part of the process of working through and growing up as an industry, right? And absolutely, really interesting point. I think a follow-on question from that then, are these roles that you were talking about, right? Performance coaching, different types of coaching, are they viable careers for people wanting to get into esports now or not?
Very true. I suppose I would just backtrack to your point about the players' communication outside of the game. I think social media is very much a live and interactive CV for players.
Oh, I like that. That's a great soundbite.
Yeah. So it keeps a track record of your accomplishments, and then it's also your personal statement. So, you know, how do you handle winning and losing? How do you approach your involvement in the game? And if you put everything out there, good, bad, negative, highly critical, those moments of emotional outbursts, if that's all out there, it's going to stay out there. And I think part of being sort of a professional in sport and esport is learning to sort of understand what is sort of appropriate to put out there, but also learning to sort of put out there what really reflects who you are. And everyone has emotional outbursts, and that's absolutely fine. And when that goes on social media, it's understandable, but obviously it's a bit of it hangs around a little bit. And so I think coaches have a role to play there, as we said, like coaching in-game communication, but also coaches acting as role models for younger players outside of in-game communication. So are the professionals that we're surrounding players with in sort of the higher end of esports, are they able to demonstrate the behaviors that should be modeled for the sort of the younger players that they're working with? And then I suppose yeah, for coaches themselves, social media is also certainly an important resource for marketing themselves and putting their CV out there. And we see LFTs all the time now saying, I studied psychology 3 years ago. I've worked with the teams. I've got to this level. I can do all this. And I think you see that coaches are really trying to professionalize the role themselves. So they're trying to establish a sort of a common ground to understanding what makes a good coach. But all the coaches, I think there's a lot of good coaches out there in esports, and they all bring something slightly different to the table. So some do come from this sort of analyst background. They have an immense game understanding. And some come from the background of sort of being able to work well with people and bring a team together. And others are just flat out motivational. They'll jump on a Discord call and raise the decibels for a while until you're really in the mood to play. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me kind of throw that around a little bit then, right? So you've just explained 3 typical backgrounds that coaches can come into the esports world from, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's missing? Why have teams got these coaches on board, and maybe they're still not performing exactly in the right way? Is that something to do with the esports industry as a whole, the way the infrastructure is set up? Do we need more coaches? Is it just a question of that? What's really missing from that structure right now?
Yeah, good point. I think it's at the moment, although there are high-profile coaches around, as we've mentioned, that there are certainly high-profile teams around, and there's an enormous sort of enthusiastic group of players out there trying to make it into the higher levels. But it's all a little bit of trial and error too, because as in traditional sports, coaching is very complex. It's heavily dependent on the sort of social and relational aspects. So being able to work with people, not just having game specific knowledge. But we don't really have a sort of a go-to formula for it right now. So there are no team is equal really. Even within the same league, there are teams that have like gaming houses. There are teams that operate solely online. Some of it is sort of a bit of both, and then there is this sort of trial and error with respect to sort of bringing in staff to help with the ultimate goal of improving the team performance. But we're not quite sure what is the winning formula there. And at the same time, it's also reflects a sort of lack of scientific academic research on it too, because esports is sort of only just becoming like turning up on the radar of people that really want to invest their time in researching esports to figure out what are not so much the do's and don'ts, but more the pros and cons of having a full staff of coaches versus having maybe one coach and some sort of more administrative roles to make sure the roles are clear and the structures are clear, and also the technical side. We might need team managers that have very technical backgrounds to make sure all that is taken care of very smoothly. So there's a lot of trial and error at the moment, and I think in addition to that, there's also a lack of training specific to esports. So we could imagine that coaches that have or athletes maybe that have come from sporting backgrounds have a good idea of what coaching is, and you think that they could probably do quite well in esports, even without the game specific knowledge, if they can just apply some of those principles of supporting the needs of the players in front of them. Maybe they could do quite well, but we don't really know, because lack of research feeds into a lack of training potential specific to esports. And then we don't have from the outside at least, you don't have a great idea of what's going on within different teams. So it's not that it needs to be more transparent, but there isn't much out there to say, well, this is what we do, and that our team is quite successful, and this is what other teams might do, and you can choose what works for you. You can't really see behind the scenes very often. So there are only some very high profile teams that do sort of.
That's a really interesting point, actually. The esports is such a closed off environment to so many people. I think people struggle to kind of get into it and get involved in it from outside, from the normal sporting world. I think we're starting to see less of that nowadays with, sports stars investing in the esports world. David Beckham's a prime example, right?
Yeah, true.
There's a certain amount of credibility and influence that people like that bring with them that then turns into more interest from that world. And I think absolutely we're starting to see that. But to summarize your point there, and tell me if I'm wrong, there's not enough research that has been done to even tell people what we are missing. It's an unknown, right?
Yeah, I think
So
so.
then,
I don't think it's the esports doesn't need the esports world doesn't need outside influence, right? It doesn't need research to evolve. It like what I love about esports is that there are so many strong characters within it, and it fuels itself. But I think that within these specific niche roles, I think there is research to be done purely to see what's the best that we can do with it. Where can we take this? And I think unless you have a sort of scientific or at least structured approach to it, we'll never really figure out what's really good practice, what's best practice in these environments.
so this is probably a really good chance for us to talk about the research specific stuff then, because I know this is an area that you're really interested in and passionate about, and it's where your background is too, right? What research needs to be done? You know, again, esports is at its core still a very niche cultural movement, right? It's obviously huge now and it's grown so much over the past 10 years, but I don't think it's got that mainstream acceptance yet from academic institutions and stuff like that. So what research needs to be done for the esports industry to continue improving? Tell me that.
Yeah, great question. I think the scientific process, in a sense, always starts with observation. So we shouldn't be inviting people into teams to say, change something. It should always be, what are we doing right now, and how's that working out for us? I think that approach, it would be very, very healthy within esports. So people from sort of outside the industry maybe have a preconception of just playing video games as unhealthy, but in a sense it's no more unhealthy than going to work and sitting at a desk for 9 hours. So the question is, how do we make that as healthy as it can be? Because
nice, take that, mums and dads.
yeah. Well, exactly, because there are so many other benefits to joining a team and playing competitively together. Like the communication skills of players is phenomenal. Like sometimes, so
Sure.
players do, like, purely through audio, they can pick up on the sort of the emotional experience of another player. And I've certainly been around players who are very in tune with how their teammates are feeling, and that's a wonderful skill to develop.
That's really interesting. So are you suggesting that there's a link between increased gameplay and in competitive team environments and an increased level of empathy? Or am I pulling at the straws there?
No, I wonder if it might not be empathy, but certainly I think that if you're, like, when you're looking at a map in League of Legends, for example, and you're coordinating your champion with 4 other champions based purely on the information coming into your ears, there is so much more information than just what's being said coming into you, right? It's also sort of the tone with which it's being said, etc., etc. And from that, you have to deduce what's the next. It informs your decision making. So I think there are some immensely skilled communicators and listeners within esports, and they don't even realize that they are. And that's kind of exciting. What do you think? I mean, as a player yourself, are you a good listener as a result of playing the game?
Interesting. I mean, I would like to believe that the more you talk to someone, the more you get to know someone, full stop, right? That's the same in team environments, full stop. If you are playing with people consistently, regularly, you get to know them on a very personal level. I think immediately then, in the wider team setting outside of game, it's very easy to pick up on if someone's not feeling the best, if someone's feeling down, if someone's feeling low, if someone isn't likely to be playing their best because of some emotional factors that are outside of the game. But I think you only get that experience from talking to someone and consistently having that interaction with them. And I think doing that in a very high pressure situation like League, in a game, Counter-Strike, whatever, really lets you pick up on those nuances in someone's voice, in someone's tone, maybe even in how they're acting and moving, if this is a live-in team situation, right? I would love to see that research done and see if there is a correlation between how people, how empathetic people can be with individuals and how much they are in an intense team environment like that. I think that would be fascinating.
I think there is some really interesting research about communication sort of after military missions, for example. So I saw some research about the post-mission debrief in fighter pilots. So teams of fighter pilots in I think it was I forget which country, but after a mission with 5 or 6 pilots, they would come back and they would have a very structured debrief, which was never led by the most experienced pilot. It was always led by one of the least experienced, or one of the less experienced, shall we say. And they had that opportunity to sort of moderate the discussion and pick out what they thought was the most important sort of achievements or failures of the mission, what needs working on, to collect the opinions of the group. And so through just having that basic structure following a mission, they were able to sort of develop skills, leadership skills, in people that weren't the leaders. And I think that esports can feed into other high performance areas like the military, like education even, and certainly traditional sports, because there is this sort of, through the communication in game and the scrim reviews after a game, for example, there is certainly, you have to learn how to communicate and work interpersonally. And I think that there are structures in esports that will evolve and be shown to be very effective, and they will transfer beyond esports. So another notch in the belt of esports, I think.
That's really interesting. I had no idea that research was even done.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's a good thing for esports teams who may be watching this podcast, trying to learn techniques to improve that, maybe their team coordination, maybe their team communication, whatever, to really take on board and try? Let the least experienced person, someone who's not the IGL in-game leader, to really carry out that debrief afterwards and try to pick out those pain points, those positive points, and really, what do you think?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in the autonomy, respecting the autonomy of players. And if you just think on the face of it, sort of the typical competitive esports player, 18, 19, 20 years old, how long have they had experience of working with a coach, working with a leader in esports? Probably only a couple of years. So you play until you're 14, 15 before you're even really aware that coaches come in and tell you what to do. And then it's like you sign with a team at 15, you're playing regularly at 16, and then you're being told what to do by someone suddenly. And I think that to carry on their development, because they would carry on developing without the coach in place. So I think a coach has to come in and be very respectful of the capacity to improve of the players, sort of without them present, So if they just carried on playing, they would carry on slowly improving, and the coach wants to come in and facilitate that development. So rather than telling them exactly what to do, let them sort of lead themselves and lead their teammates, and that will add like another dimension to their development, because they'll have to then think for themselves, discuss they put their feelings and experiences and thoughts into words, but then also consider someone else's perspective. And then the coach also shows that they trust their athletes, which is empowering them, which is supportive of their motivation, which is fantastic. But it also shows that the coach is a very courageous, strong leader, because he's willing to give away this power, or sorry, I should say he or she is able to give away this power. So I think a good coach is a great listener, definitely, but is able to sort of give away the platform to the players. And then if you develop these structures where it's just automatic that the players will lead the discussion or the topic or the structure or the focus, or even establish the goals for the scrim, there's no better development, really. I think it's a great opportunity to give away that control there. So
that's really interesting. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice step into probably our next topic, which is psychology. Psychology within esports specifically is very different to how psychological coaching happens elsewhere, right? This is an area where you've got a ton of experience, being you're a trainee sports psychologist. So let's talk about this for a while then. Why is psychology a hot topic in esports right now? Like, tell me about it.
So I guess I'll start with a question.
Nice. I love that.
When you were playing, was that an emotional experience for you when you were playing?
Absolutely, it was. It was emotional in the sense that I hated everyone. The only real kind of common thought process around psychology and that like players tend to take on board is tilting, right?
Exactly.
Is if you have a bad game, how are you feeling afterwards? Are you feeling okay to maybe lose again? Are you feeling really frustrated? Are you tilted? if that's the case, then the common conception now is to stop, right? But that's such a basic level of psychology, and I would imagine, I'm not the expert here at all, you are, there is so many levels deeper than that to really dig into.
Absolutely. The concept of tilting is obviously, I think, very popular. It's also kind of hilarious when somebody says that, you know, I got tilted and left the game. I think it's obviously not what we want to encourage, but I think it's really funny. But we're used to talking about sort of psychological aspects of the game, and we don't really put it into this box of, oh, sports psychology is present and important. But I think you see it sometimes in traditional sports with sort of the managers after a game. Sports psychology will always be there when they need something to blame immediately after a game. Nice. It'll never be there at the start of the week when they need something to work on. So sports psychology, it's not something you can say it's you know, it's either there or it's not there. It's like it just we always have these thoughts, we always have emotions, and the principles that we sort of that exist within sports psychology and applied sports psychology, they can help people have a better experience, I think, and hopefully perform better. It might not lead to performance, but hopefully if you apply some of the sort of current understanding within the field of sports psychology to esports performance, then people are likely to have a better experience, and they're likely to have a higher level of well-being as a result. And if your foundation of well-being increases and your level of stress decreases, those two factors alone are likely to improve your performance.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to bring someone in who's like, I'm going to stop you from getting tilted. You might just want to bring someone in to say, I'm gonna give you some social support. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. And just the act of talking to someone might make them feel better, and then they go into the game with that sort of marginally higher level of well-being and happiness, and then they're less likely to tilt. Or if they still get a little bit irritated and annoyed, it doesn't break into the sort of tilt territory.
Leaving the game, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
everyone gets frustrated by that, right? Even people who aren't tilted, if someone leaves your game in League midway through, that's the most frustrating thing in the world, you know. Let's talk about tilting a little bit more, right?
Okay.
Because this is a subject that everyone's experienced, everyone has been through and goes through on a regular basis if they're playing esports titles. My very basic understanding of this would say that tilting is a phenomenon almost unique to esports, right? Because it's not like if you're playing American football, rugby, soccer, football, right? That you go and consistently play 6 games in a row, 10 games in a row all day, right? It's usually one game, you win or lose, and then you're annoyed or you're happy from a win or a loss. In League, in CSGO, it's not uncommon for you to play 10 games in a day, right? That's a very different psychological phenomenon that comes out then from tilting, which affects your gameplay progressively throughout the day, depending on how the last outcome of the match went, potentially, right?
Yeah.
Or am I completely wrong there?
No, I think the phenomenon of tilting is very much only in esports, but I think it's just called something else in other sports. So yeah, there's some the sort of lecture 1 on any sports psychology course might talk about this sort of optimal zone of individual functioning. And this is this area where you are feeling highly energized, intense, physically activated. You're feeling some intensity of emotion, but you feel like it's helpful, it's beneficial, it's not debilitative, it's not damaging to your performance. But then as soon as those intense feelings increase, you sort of fall off a cliff, and your performance drops suddenly because you're suddenly in a territory where it's catastrophizing and feeling very negative about things. And that stage where someone's, for example, maybe over anxious about a situation or overly stressed about a situation and feeling maybe even that they might need to take a moment and sit down and relax. Like when you're in that stage, you can see emotional outbursts in every sport. So for example, the goalkeeper in football that lets in a simple goal and then kicks the post, that could be the start of a very bad day in the park for that goalkeeper. And I think that's the same in esports. When someone starts tilting, or when someone starts feeling really negative emotion or like concern, frustration, irritation, and they don't have the psychological tools to sort of manage those feelings and curb that sort of intense experience, it can start a sort of a strong downward spiral in their performance. But it's always the build up to that point. So it's how someone approaches the performance. It's how they see the importance of the outcome. It's how much they're focusing on the outcome, how much they see that they are in control of their performance within that game. It can also be all sorts of other factors unrelated to the game that they're bringing into performance as well, which is affecting them. And so I think when you're working with an applied sports psychologist, their goal is to put you into the best possible position before any tilting occurs, before any sort of catastrophizing or sort of overly anxious experience occurs. So
absolutely. And again, preventing is the best cure you can ever have to any sort of issue, right?
Yeah.
So for the people at home, how can they avoid being tilted? Have you got any small tips or psychological sort of, I don't know, phrases, stuff that they can do at home which can help them go into a game and avoid being tilted to begin with?
I think probably the most common idea that floats around is being able to focus on the process. And what we mean by that is, I think in esports, more than most sports on the planet, the outcome is so prominent, or like the result of a game is so important and so scrutinized and intensely sort of widely publicized and spoken about, so that it's hard to go into a game not thinking about what's going to happen if we win or lose this game. And it even comes across in the terminology. It's like you might hear a coach one day say, we lost this game, we had a good week of scrims, I've got no doubt we're going to win at the weekend. And on the face of it, that sounds very positive, but actually it's emphasizing a focus on the result of a game. And if you can avoid thinking that way and instead focus on the shorter steps that you need to follow in order to have a good game yourself, you're probably more likely to execute those small steps to a higher level of performance than if your focus is on the end of the game and the result and all of the sort of emotional factors you attach to that, the meaning of the result. So I'm trying to think of maybe an example. Maybe if you're playing support and you're trying to, in League of Legends, if you're playing in the support role and you're trying to keep track of timers, and you make it your focus to sort of every 5 minutes just check your timers, and if you can nail that every 5 minutes, you're going to be playing well, and that's likely to feed into a better performance, which might result in a win. But it would be better than just focusing on the outcome of the game, and you might lose track of your timers, and therefore your performance is almost certainly likely to suffer. So I think
absolutely small steps to victory, right? It's all about focusing on the process, not the outcome. Exactly. The outcome's going to happen one way or another. The only thing that you can do to change that are the small steps that eventually lead to that victory or loss, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's probably. Oh, sorry, I completely cut you off.
No, it's all good. I think part of that. So how can you actually use that? I think there's some of the best sort of performance coaches, sports psychologists that we know in esports at the moment. For example, Ismail Pedraza over at Rogue. They're very good with pre-performance routines, developing pre-performance routines with their individual players and with the team themselves. So the players will know in advance of a big game what they're going to do in the build up to the game, and then through that they'll have like a sort of a narrowing of their focus onto those sort of short intermediate steps within their performance to sort of play well. So yeah, that's another way you can do it. Just have a nice clear pre-performance routine, so you don't have to put much energy into thinking about what you're going to do. It's just you're just following a plan. And
nice. So that probably is a really nice segue again into some common misconceptions about psychology within esports, right? Yeah. People think, and this is from a consumer perspective, right, that the only role of an esports psychologist is to make sure that someone wins or the other person loses, right? And for you to avoid as many losses as possible. Is that true? Is that a complete misconception?
Well, behind the scenes, we've laughed about this because we think it's a fair point to say that if I'm bringing someone onto my team, I expect them to help us get better.
Of course.
And I think it's actually just a symptom of the sort of the short-term nature of esports at the moment. So, a League of Legends roster might be together just for one split, which is 2 months, and then who knows what they're doing. So it sort of emphasizes the outcome over sort of the investing in those other things that might take a little bit longer to develop, which could be their sort of individual skill development, that kind of stuff, their sort of mental approach to the game. Those things could take a little bit longer.
And that's a really interesting point. When you look at a team like G2, right, they've been around for a couple of seasons now together, pretty much as they are right now. And they are right now the most successful league team Europe has ever put out there, right? So would you say that one of the issues with esports teams in general is the short-term nature of esports games and esports competitive environments?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think so. It's intuitive because there is a definition of high performance and high performing cultures that says that there is a difference between high performance and high performing, in that you can be working in high performance sport and not be high performing. If you're high performing, you're maximizing the use of the resources that you have available to you. If you're not high performing, you could still be in high performance sport, but you're not really making the best use of the resources available to you. So you could have a whole staff of physios, chefs, nutritionists, but they're not really coming together to make the team any better. So you could even just have one head coach and an analyst, and they could be in sync with the players completely, and you're maximizing the resources you have available to you. And there you'd be a very high performing team sort of relative to the resources you have. And I've sort of gone off track there a little bit.
Not at all. So no, that feeds again into the next point really well. So what you're saying there is it's not necessarily the amount of resources you have available to you, chefs, nutritionists, etc. It's how you use the resources that you have right now.
I would say so. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think this short-term sort of, at the moment, I would say esports is suffering from a little bit of a short-term vision, and for obvious reasons, because outcomes are attached to sponsorship, and without sponsorship, it's hard to sort of have the team hold together. And players will at the moment, I think players, I'm not sure if it doesn't seem common to me that players are signed up to contracts of years or even months. They might just be signed up for that one competitive season. And so I think it's really important to think that we don't really know what can be achieved over a long time with the same group being together, with the same staff being together, because we in esports, we talk a lot about growth and development and improvement, but it's intuitive that those things take a long time. So I don't think that you could say that you really experience growth if you just train something for a week. Because
absolutely, completely agree. And that's common, that's very common knowledge, right? You can't expect someone to be the best performing version of themselves after only training for a week. And that is the same as a team environment, right? A team environment is just an extension of one person. Everyone's working together for one whole, right? For one result or for one outcome. And that can be improved over time. That would make sense to me and my very dumb monkey brain, right? It's not coming from an expert
not at all
whatsoever. So that again leads on to the question of is performance coaching important in esports? Is that going to be the key for these smaller teams that haven't got access to these huge amounts of resources? Is that going to be the one thing they need to utilize the resources they have right now to their maximum?
As a sort of fairly novice performance coach myself, well, no, I've been involved for a year now, but
don't undersell yourself. Come on, mate.
I would say yes, most definitely. I think that just having someone, what I found most useful was sort of my role with LDN has just been the observation. So having someone there just to observe what's going on, and then at times feedback with an opinion about maybe we could do this better, maybe we could do this better. And I think with this, it's sort of like playing the role of like a critical friend in a sense. So I'm not yet a fully trained sports psychologist. I can't use that title, sports psychologist, It's my intention to one day be able to get there. But at the moment, I wouldn't feel so comfortable by doing one-on-one sessions with players and really sort of trying to address their needs and offer them a plan to improve. I'm happy to give advice for sure, but I wouldn't sort of ethically, I wouldn't profess to be able to give them sort of real adequate psychological support. So a performance coach can come in, I think, and assist the coach and assist the development of the team and get closer to that high performing status by simply observing what's going on and being a little bit sort of critical about what's going on. So was the communication after that scrim as good as it could be? And if not, how could we improve it? So you don't have to be a sort of a jack of all trades. You don't have to be a sort of master of sports science. You don't have to be a trainee sports psychologist. You don't have to be you don't have to have one bake off to be able to sort of give nutritional advice. You know what I mean?
Nice.
So it's you can come in and just be someone that has an idea about performance. Maybe you have experience in sport. Maybe you are a great communicator. Maybe you've studied language in some way, and you are able to observe what's going on. And then you have an ability to sort of form a good, close relationship with those around you. And then you say, well, we did this, and how do we feel about it, and how can we improve it? And so I think teams that don't have a performance coach would benefit from someone coming in and doing that. And even better, that performance coach comes with expertise in physical training, or even sort of yoga, or more sports psychological aspects, things like that. So you can add to the role, but that leaves the coach free to focus on the in-game things and sort of imprint their beliefs, their values on the team, and collect the values and beliefs of the players, and together they can all get on the same page. And that will, I imagine, that would bring the sort of performance coach with them. But yeah, it's maybe like another post to rely on to sort of support that high performing culture, I suppose.
Interesting. And we have talked an awful lot today about coaches, but there's one aspect right here which we are sort of skipping over, the players, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about Worlds, the finals, what the players themselves are likely to be going through in the run up to the game. I mean, it's tomorrow, right? Worlds finals. Worlds is the pinnacle. Being able to lift the Summoners Cup is what every league player dreams of, right? It's the World Cup. It's the pinnacle of achievement in professional league. Okay, I'd be terrified if I was in their shoes. What sort of emotional processes are they kind of going through now?
Why would you be terrified?
Because this is the pinnacle potentially of your professional career. It's not uncommon or unlikely that players only get one shot at this.
Mm-hmm. And so where's your focus there?
The focus there is on the outcome, is on the win or the loss.
Okay, and you're ascribing to that outcome an awful lot of significance. So between the lines, you could read between the lines, and it seems to me that the outcome you're talking about there is sort of end of career or continue in esports. It's probably likely that these guys will carry on playing, and if they strongly believe in themselves, they're probably thinking that they have a shot at Worlds finals 3, 4, 5 times again if they have that high level of belief and confidence. And I think having a high level of confidence in their ability is what got them there in the first place. So these Worlds players are probably very confident in their abilities. And I'm not talking about arrogance or a high ego. I think they're probably just very confident in knowing what they want to do, how they do it, and knowing that they've done it before, which feeds into that confidence. So I think that their thoughts, I can't profess to know, of course, but we have sort of insights from athletes in traditional sports who, in advance of big competitions, the ones that are more successful tend to be able to focus on the event itself, on the process, as we spoke about earlier, what they need to achieve within the event to be successful. And then the sort of outcome of the event itself has meaning to them. So, of course, you can expect that anyone on the planet, any human being, will have a wide range of emotions leading up to a major final, and that's totally okay. I mean, that's to be expected, and we should be able to accept that and acknowledge that happens in elite athletes as well as amateur athletes. That we get nervous, of course, because the event is meaningful to us. But as we get closer to it, we go through our training, we go through our processes, our focus gets narrower and narrower, and it ultimately comes down to, within the first 5 minutes, I'm going to be doing this. In the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be doing this, and I'll know how well I'm doing if I'm doing this, and if I'm not doing this, then I'll be doing this. At the same time, enjoying being there with people that you like, with a team around you that you have respect for and that respect you and that want the best for you. And then hopefully somebody there saying, you've just made it to World's Final. It's going to be a brilliant experience. You've already done your sort of career and reputation and sort of character the greatest, or a whole lot of good here. So there's all sorts of positives that you've already achieved. So go in, head up high, and really enjoy the experience. So that could be one thing that
is inspirational. There, I love it. Absolutely.
Maybe
small steps to victory. Again, that's exactly it, right? From the stuff that we've been talking about today, it really seems like if you want to improve your chances as best you can, from not tilting to winning worlds, right? The only thing that you should be focusing on is what you're doing right at this second, or what you need to do in the next 5, 10, 15 minutes, rather than the outcome of the game, right?
True. Yeah. Well said. The other thing I would expand on there is it's not so easy to just focus on the present moment. So we spend so much time thinking in the future and a little bit less, but this isn't fact, but it's an idea that we spend a lot of time thinking about the future events, and sometimes some majority of time thinking about past events. It's much harder to really focus on the present, and it requires a lot of training. And no doubt these Worlds players, these Worlds finalists, will have been training hard all week. And that's probably a good thing, because without that to occupy their attention, they could probably swing back into thoughts about the future and what ifs. And so essentially I would say, focus on the present moment is great, but it takes a lot of work and dedication, and you have to have a sort of a plan, even in the days ahead of it. So I'm going to be training on these days. What do I want to get out of that training? And then you evaluate your performance based on how well you stuck to those goals and you achieved those goals, rather than letting your attention swing back and forth, which it will do at some point, but trying to limit that, I think.
Inspirational stuff there, mate. I love it. So I guess to wrap up then, it's World's Finals tomorrow. What are your predictions? Who's going to win?
Yeah, based on limited experience of both teams, I watch quite a lot of top esports and certainly the European teams, but I have a feeling that I've heard Suning are very good. Well, they're both very good, but I like Dam1 and I like their logo quite a lot, and it mystifies me.
Nice artistic choice, I love it.
Yeah, it mystifies me. I don't know what it means, but it looks quite impressive. It looks, intimidating. So maybe they have the edge.
Nice. I'm going 3-2 Suning.
Okay.
I
Why
like
is that?
an underdog as much as you can have an underdog in the World's Finals. Obviously, both these teams deserve to be there and are fantastic, but I feel like watching them throughout the tournament, they've performed less well than Dam1. And I'm really looking forward to seeing exactly how it pans out tomorrow. I want a full 5-game series. I don't want none of this 3-0 sweeps. I want a full 5-game series, to really warrant the World's Finals experience, right?
Is there a stylistic difference between the teams?
You're asking the wrong guy there, mate.
Okay.
You're the esports coach. I would say, they are both very the next generation of Korean and Chinese teams. These guys like to fight, and it's going to be really exciting games, I'm sure. But so often these games can steamroll, and the first game's out of the way, second game's out of the way, maybe 2-0 to Dam1, and then that last game is so easy because the other team is so demoralized, And I think, some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, I'd really like to think that they're taken on board from their own teams of coaches, obviously, to really make sure that the viewers, us, get a 5-game series and they maximize their chances to win.
Absolutely. Yeah, that if it was 2-0, well, we should unfortunately have to ask Fnatic.
Yeah, well, exactly, man. Exactly.
What's your thought process?
No one wants that, do they?
No. Anyway, yeah.
Cool. So on that note, let's wrap up. Next week, we will be talking about Imposter Syndrome within teams, results day from Worlds, and anything else that kind of comes up during the week. Thanks for your time today, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Cheers.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.